America has spent over $300 billion on mega projects that either don't work, serve no purpose, or were obsolete before they were finished. We're not talking about ambitious failures or projects that had noble goals. These are boondoggles, money pits and monuments to government incompetence and corporate greed. 12 massive construction projects that wasted your tax dollars, destroyed communities, and in some cases made problems worse than before they started. What you're about to hear will make your blood boil. Project number 1 is the Big Dig in Boston, officially called the Central Artery Tunnel Project. This highway reconstruction was supposed to cost $2.6 billion and take 6 years. It actually cost $24.3 billion and took 16 years. That's nearly 10 times the original budget. The Big Dig became synonymous with cost overruns, corruption, and incompetence. And here's the kicker. It barely improved traffic. The project replaced an elevated highway with an underground tunnel system running through downtown Boston. The idea was to reduce congestion and reconnect neighborhoods that had been divided by the old highway. Sounds great in theory. The execution was a disaster. Construction began in 1991 and wasn't substantially complete until 2007. During those 16 years, Boston was a construction nightmare. Traffic was worse than before. Businesses closed because customers couldn't reach them, and the city became a national joke. The cost overruns were legendary. The project used experimental construction techniques that didn't work and had to be redone. The tunnel boring machines broke down repeatedly. Geological surprises under Boston added years and billions to the project. But the real scandal was the corruption. Contractors knowingly used substandard materials. Inspectors were bribed to approve shoddy work. The result was catastrophic failures even before the project was complete. In 2006, just before the tunnels officially opened, a massive concrete ceiling panel weighing 3 tons fell and crushed a car, killing a woman. Investigation revealed that the adhesive used to secure the panels was completely inadequate. Thousands of panels had to be removed and reinstalled using proper fasteners. The contractor responsible paid fines, but faced no criminal charges. The family of the victim settled for $6 million, a fraction of what their lawsuit sought. Problems continued. The tunnels leak constantly. Millions are spent annually on pumping water out. The ventilation system is inadequate, leading to dangerous carbon monoxide levels. The design included numerous exits that dump traffic directly into residential neighborhoods, creating new congestion problems. Studies show that overall traffic times in Boston improved by less than 10%. Hardly worth $24 billion. The financial burden crippled Massachusetts for decades. The state borrowed heavily to fund the Big Dig, and debt service ate up transportation budgets that could have been used for other projects. Routine road maintenance was deferred across the state because all the money went to servicing Big Dig debt. Bridges deteriorated. Highways crumbled. But the Big Dig debt had to be paid. Project number 2 is California's high-speed rail, a project so dysfunctional that it's become an international embarrassment. Approved by voters in 2008 with a promised cost of $33 billion. The rail line was supposed to connect San Francisco to Los Angeles in under 3 hours by 2020. As of 2025, not a single mile of track is operational. The cost estimate has ballooned to over $130 billion. And completion dates have been pushed back to 2033 or beyond. The project was sold to voters as a modern, efficient alternative to flying or driving between California's major cities. The trains would travel at over 200 miles per hour, would be powered by renewable energy, and would pay for themselves through ticket sales. None of that has materialized. After 17 years and over $20 billion spent, there's nothing to show but some concrete viaducts in the Central Valley going nowhere. The problems are systematic and severe. The route planning was political rather than practical. Instead of connecting the major population centers first, the project started construction in the Central Valley because land was cheaper and political opposition was lower. This meant building the least useful segment first, a stretch of track between 2 small cities that nobody needs to travel between at high speed. Environmental reviews took years and added billions in costs. The route had to be modified dozens of times to avoid protected habitats, archaeological sites, and politically connected landowners. New environmental studies and new delays. The project became a jobs program for consultants and lawyers, rather than a construction program for trains. Land acquisition has been a nightmare. The state used eminent domain to seize property, but landowners fought back with lawsuits that dragged on for years. Construction costs in California are the highest in the world, and high-speed rail demonstrates why. Labor agreements require prevailing wages far above market rates. Environmental regulations require extensive mitigation for every square foot of habitat disturbed. Seismic requirements because of earthquake risk add massive cost to every structure. Utility relocations because California has terrible utility records, cost billions. A mile of track that cost $50 million to build in Europe costs over $300 million in California. The ridership projections that justified the project have been thoroughly discredited. The original estimates assumed that millions of people would abandon cars and planes for the train. Independent analysis shows those numbers were fantasy. The ticket prices needed to cover operating costs would be higher than budget airline flights. The travel time, once you include getting to and from stations, wouldn't be much faster than driving. The train is solving a problem that doesn't exist. Several segments of the project have been quietly canceled. The expensive tunnels through mountains have been deferred indefinitely. The connections into downtown San Francisco and Los Angeles have been abandoned in favor of stopping at suburban stations. What's being built now is barely recognizable as high-speed rail. The trains will share tracks with freight and commuter rail in many sections, meaning they'll never reach the promised speeds. Project number 3 is the Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Repository, a project that consumed $15 billion over 30 years and will never open. The facility was supposed to solve America's nuclear waste problem by creating a permanent underground storage site in Nevada. After decades of construction, extensive scientific studies, and massive public investment, the project was killed for purely political reasons. The site is actually ideal for nuclear waste storage. Yucca Mountain is in the middle of nowhere, in a desert that gets almost no rain, with geology that would contain radiation for tens of thousands of years. The facility design was scientifically sound. The Energy Department spent billions excavating tunnels, building surface facilities, and conducting safety studies. But Nevada politicians opposed the project from the start. No state wants to be the nation's nuclear dump, even if the science says it's safe. When Harry Reid became Senate Majority Leader, he used his power to defund the project. Who needed Reid's support, killed Yucca Mountain despite the scientific consensus supporting it. The facility was 90% complete and ready to begin accepting waste within years. Now America has no long-term solution for nuclear waste. Spent fuel rods sit in temporary storage pools at nuclear power plants across the country. Exactly the situation Yucca Mountain was supposed to solve. These temporary sites are far less secure and far more vulnerable than the Nevada facility would have been. The irony is that Nevada residents are probably less safe now because nuclear waste is scattered across dozens of sites rather than consolidated in one engineered repository. The financial waste is staggering. $15 billion bought some tunnels in a mountain that will never be used. The nuclear power industry paid into a fund for decades to finance the repository. That money was collected and spent, but the industry got nothing. Now utilities are suing the government for breach of contract, and taxpayers will foot the bill for tens of billions in settlements. Project number 4 is the Hanford Site Cleanup in Washington State, an environmental remediation project that has cost over $60 billion so far and will likely top $200 billion before completion, if it's ever completed. Hanford produced plutonium for nuclear weapons during the Cold War, and the site is so contaminated that it's the most polluted place in the Western Hemisphere. The cleanup has been ongoing since the late 1980s, and progress has been glacial. The main challenge is 56 million gallons of radioactive waste stored in underground tanks, many of which are leaking. The plan is to build a vitrification plant that will convert the liquid waste into glass, which can then be safely stored. Sounds straightforward. The vitrification plant has been under construction since 2000 and was supposed to be operational by 2011. It's now 2025, and the plant still isn't finished. The cost has gone from $4 billion to over $20 billion. The technical challenges proved far more difficult than anticipated. The radioactive waste is more varied in composition than expected, and the vitrification process keeps clogging or corroding the equipment. Design flaws were discovered that required major reconstruction. Whistleblowers revealed that contractors knowingly installed defective systems. Meanwhile, the tanks keep leaking. Radioactive waste is seeping into the soil and heading toward the Columbia River, one of the most important waterways in the Northwest. The Department of Energy insists there's no immediate danger, but independent scientists say contamination of the river is inevitable if the cleanup doesn't accelerate. The timeline for completion keeps being pushed back, but nobody believes that date. The human cost is significant. Workers at Hanford have been exposed to radiation and toxic chemicals. Many have developed cancers and other illnesses. The contractor, Bechtel, has paid settlements to workers but continues to oppose stricter safety measures that would slow construction. The local community depends on Hanford for jobs, creating a perverse incentive to keep the cleanup going slowly to maintain employment. Project number 5 is Detroit's People Mover, a downtown automated train that cost $200 million to build in 1987 and has been essentially useless ever since. The system is a 2.9-mile elevated loop around downtown Detroit with 13 stations. It carries fewer than 5,000 passengers per day, making it one of the least used transit systems in America. The People Mover was conceived in the 1970s when Detroit was planning a comprehensive regional rail system. That larger system was canceled, but the downtown loop was built anyway as a consolation prize. Without connections to neighborhoods or suburbs, the People Mover goes nowhere useful. It's essentially a very expensive amusement park ride that happens to be publicly funded. Operating the system cost $15 million per year, almost all of it subsidized by taxpayers. The fare is 75 cents, which doesn't come close to covering costs. The trains run on a fixed schedule, whether there are passengers or not, circling an increasingly empty downtown. During the 2008 financial crisis, there were serious proposals to just shut it down, but political inertia kept it running. The infrastructure is decaying because there's no money for proper maintenance. Stations are dingy and feel unsafe. The trains themselves are original equipment from the 1980s, well past their design life. Parts are difficult to source because the manufacturer no longer supports the system. Detroit keeps the People Mover running not because it's useful, but because admitting it was a waste would be too embarrassing. Project number 6 is the Superconducting Super Collider in Texas, a particle accelerator that was supposed to be the crown jewel of American physics research. Congress approved the project in 1987, with an estimated cost of $4.4 billion. By 1993, $2 billion had been spent, but the cost estimate had risen to $12 billion. Congress canceled the project, leaving a massive hole in the Texas desert and nothing else. The Superconducting Super Collider was supposed to be 3 times more powerful than Europe's Large Hadron Collider. American physicists promised it would unlock the secrets of the universe and cement American scientific leadership. The project began with great enthusiasm. Thousands of workers descended on Waxahachie, Texas, to dig a 54-mile tunnel loop underground. Then reality set in. The engineering challenges were immense. The project required thousands of superconducting magnets, each costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Management was chaotic, with constant turnover and no clear accountability. Meanwhile, the Cold War ended, and Congress lost interest in funding massive science projects. The cancellation left 14 miles of tunnel and massive surface facilities that have sat abandoned for over 30 years. The local community that had geared up for a long-term project was left with nothing. $2 billion vanished underground. Literally, some of the tunnel has been repurposed for storage and mushroom farming, but most of it is just empty. The scientific loss is incalculable. The Large Hadron Collider in Europe eventually discovered the Higgs boson, a discovery that would have been made in Texas if the Superconducting Super Collider had been completed. American physics research lost a generation of leadership. The best physicists went to Europe where the facilities existed. Project number 7 is the OCONUS Fiber Optic Cable Project, a Defense Department initiative to connect military bases worldwide with dedicated undersea cables. The project started in 2003, with a budget of $1 billion. By 2015, over $7 billion had been spent, and the network was still incomplete and largely redundant. The military argued it needed its own communications network separate from commercial internet. The problem is that commercial fiber networks already connect everywhere the military needs to communicate. Building parallel infrastructure was wasteful from the start, which drove up costs. The routes were politically determined rather than optimized, adding length and expense. The system was obsolete before it was finished. Satellite communications advanced to the point where fiber cables were unnecessary for many applications. The bandwidth that seemed essential in 2003 was easily available commercially by 2015. The military ended up using commercial networks anyway because they were faster and more reliable than the custom system. The contractor, a consortium of defense companies, made enormous profits while delivering a system that barely works. Many segments of the network have never been activated. Others are used so lightly that they could be replaced with commercial services for a fraction of the cost. The Pentagon refuses to disclose exact usage figures, but leaks suggest the network carries less than 10% of military communications. Project number 8 is the Sea Launch Floating Rocket Platform, a commercial space launch system that cost $3.5 billion, launched 36 rockets, and went bankrupt twice. The concept was to launch rockets from a converted oil platform on the equator, which provides fuel efficiency benefits. In practice, the system was too expensive and too unreliable to compete. The platform was a Norwegian oil rig converted to a launch facility. The rockets were designed by Russian and Ukrainian companies and assembled in California before being shipped to the platform. The operational headquarters was in Long Beach. The complexity of coordinating across multiple countries and time zones was a nightmare. Every launch required moving the platform from California to the equator and back, a process taking weeks. The launches themselves had a checkered record. Several rockets exploded on the pad, or shortly after liftoff. The platform was damaged multiple times and required expensive repairs. The insurance costs were astronomical. Commercial satellite customers started avoiding sea launch because the reliability was questionable. The company went bankrupt in 2009, was restructured, and went bankrupt again in 2014. The concept might have worked in the 1990s when launch options were limited. By the 2000s, SpaceX and other companies were offering cheaper, more reliable launches from land-based facilities. Sea launch couldn't compete. The platform was eventually sold to a Russian company that attempted to restart operations but gave up. It now sits idle, a rusting monument to a bad idea. Project number 9 is the Army's Future Combat Systems, a program to develop next-generation military vehicles and weapons. Launched in 2003, with an estimated cost of $92 billion. The program was canceled in 2009 after consuming over $20 billion and delivering exactly 0 operational systems. The concept was to network all military units with advanced communications, create lightweight vehicles with unprecedented firepower, and develop autonomous robots for combat. It was ambitious to the point of fantasy. The technology didn't exist to do what the Army wanted. Contractors promised they could develop it, took billions in research funding, and failed. The vehicles were supposed to be lightweight to be air transportable but heavily armored to survive combat. Physics doesn't allow both. The prototypes were either too heavy to fly or too vulnerable to use. The networking systems were supposed to share real-time battlefield data, but the software never worked reliably. The robots were supposed to operate autonomously but required constant human oversight. After 6 years of development, the Army finally admitted the program was unworkable and canceled it. Some of the research was salvaged for other programs, but the vast majority of the spending produced nothing. The cancellation was devastating for defense contractors, who had hired thousands of workers for a program that evaporated overnight. Project number 10 is the Virtual Case File System for the FBI, a software project that cost $170 million and was never used. The FBI needed to modernize its case management system after September 11th, exposed how outdated its technology was. The Bureau contracted with Science Applications International Corporation to build a new system. What they delivered was so terrible that it was scrapped entirely. The project was doomed from the start by changing requirements. The FBI kept adding features and modifying specifications while development was underway. The contractor built to the original specifications, then had to redo everything when requirements changed. This happened repeatedly. By the time the system was delivered in 2005, it was already obsolete. The software itself was a disaster. It crashed constantly, couldn't handle the volume of data the FBI needed to store, and had a user interface so confusing that agents couldn't figure out how to use it. Security testing revealed vulnerabilities so severe that deploying the system would have compromised classified information. The FBI conducted an honest assessment and concluded the system was unsalvageable. The $170 million bought nothing. The FBI had to start over with a new contractor and new specifications. The replacement system, Sentinel, eventually worked but cost an additional $450 million. The total cost to replace a system that should have been straightforward was over $600 million. Project number 11 is the International Space Station's continued operation beyond its design life. The ISS was supposed to operate for 15 years and be decommissioned by 2015. It's now 2025, and the station is still operating despite being held together with patches and prayers. NASA spends over $3 billion per year, maintaining a facility that has produced minimal scientific return. The ISS was a political project more than a scientific one. It kept Russian aerospace engineers employed after the Soviet Union collapsed, preventing brain drain to rogue nations. It gave NASA something to do after the shuttle program had no clear mission. The scientific justification was always thin. Most of the research conducted on ISS could be done more cheaply with unmanned spacecraft or ground-based facilities. The station is literally falling apart. Systems fail regularly and require constant repair. Air leaks have developed that can't be fully fixed. The Russian modules are in particularly bad shape, with critical systems well past their design life. NASA is flying spare parts up regularly, because the station requires more maintenance than anticipated. The cost to keep ISS running could fund multiple robotic missions to Mars, Europa, and other destinations with far higher scientific value. But admitting the station is a waste would mean acknowledging that hundreds of billions spent over decades produced little of value. So NASA keeps flying missions, keeps spending billions, and keeps pretending ISS is essential. Project number 12 is the modernization of the IRS tax processing system, a project that has consumed over $4 billion since the 1990s and still runs on computer code from the 1960s. The IRS has attempted multiple times to replace its ancient systems with modern technology. Every attempt has failed spectacularly. The current system uses programming languages that haven't been taught in universities for 40 years. Finding programmers who can maintain the code is nearly impossible. The IRS is hiring retirees to come back and work on systems they built decades ago, because nobody else understands them. The situation is absurd and dangerous. A major system failure could bring tax collection to a halt. Multiple contractors have tried and failed to modernize the systems. The complexity is overwhelming. The tax code changes constantly, and the systems have to be updated to reflect new laws. Decades of modifications have created spaghetti code that nobody fully understands. Trying to replace it while keeping tax processing running is like rebuilding an airplane in flight. The waste is ongoing. Billions have been spent on modernization efforts that produce nothing usable. Meanwhile, the old systems limp along, increasingly fragile. The IRS estimates it would take $15 billion in a decade to fully modernize. But Congress refuses to appropriate that much money for an agency that's politically unpopular. So the IRS continues running on technology from the Johnson administration while hackers and fraudsters exploit vulnerabilities that can't be fixed. These 12 megaprojects represent over $200 billion wasted on projects that failed, were obsolete, or never should have been started. The pattern is consistent across all of them. Unrealistic promises, political interference, contractor incompetence, and lack of accountability. The people who approved these projects faced no consequences. The contractors who failed to deliver kept their profits. And taxpayers are left with the bill for failures that could have been prevented with basic oversight and honesty.